there with an open heart, expecting romance. And on the third day of the cruise, I realized my wife hadn't come there for me. We'd been married 16 years, Paige and I. We bought our house in a quiet suburb outside Portland, paid it down year after year, filled it with the ordinary life two people build when they think they have time. And in all those 16 years, we never once took a real vacation. There was always a reason. The mortgage, her work, mine, a roof that needed doing. We kept telling ourselves the trip would come later. So when I booked the cruise, it felt like I was finally making good on a promise I'd carried for years. 7 nights up the Inside Passage to Alaska, leaving out of Seattle. An ocean view cabin, the kind with a window where you wake up to water. I didn't book the cheap option. I wanted her to feel that this mattered to me, that we mattered. I spent 3 months on it, comparing ships, reading about the ports, picking the cabin deck. I'd catch myself smiling at my desk thinking about it. 16 years is a long time to go without sitting still together. And somewhere in me, I believed this trip would put something back that the years had quietly worn down. We drove up from Portland in the outback, bags in the back, coffee in the cup holders. Paige was 39, I was 46, and on that drive she laughed at something on the radio and reached over and squeezed my hand. I thought we were going to be fine. I believed that. I want you to understand that I really believed it. The first strange thing started in the first days, before I even had a word for it. Paige kept leaving. Small reasons, always. One afternoon, it was coffee. Another time, she'd forgotten a sweater back in the cabin and went to get it. Then it was souvenirs she wanted to look at. None of it was unusual on its own. People wander on a ship, but she'd be gone a long time. Not 10 minutes. 40. An hour. And she'd come back a little breathless, a little bright, with a story about a line at the cafe or a wrong turn down the wrong corridor. At first, I believed all of it. A ship that size is confusing the first day or two. I figured she'd gotten turned around. I poured myself a drink and watched the coast slide past the window and waited for her. But the thing about a cruise ship is that it's built so you never have to go far. There's a bar on nearly every deck. Pools, lounges, a cafe around every corner. Everything is close. Everything is easy. That's the whole point of it. So when your wife disappears for an hour to get a cup of coffee that's being poured 2 hallways away, the math stops working. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to be the husband who counts minutes. But I started counting them anyway. Quietly. Every time she stood up and said she'd be right back, I'd look at the clock and I'd hate myself a little for looking. Then I noticed 2 more things, and they were harder to explain away. The first was the internet. Out there, the onboard connection is expensive and slow, and it drops constantly. Most people give up on it by the second day. They put their phones in a drawer and actually look at the water. That's half the reason you go. But Paige did the opposite. She started watching her phone like it owed her something. She'd take it off to check a work email. She'd step outside to text her mom. And she carried it the way you carry something you're afraid of losing, screen against her, hand always around it. The second thing happened on the 4th afternoon. I called her. She'd gone off somewhere, the usual somewhere, and I called just to ask if she wanted dinner early. It rang out. I called again. Nothing. For 40 minutes my calls went nowhere. When she finally turned up, she said she was sorry. She just hadn't heard it. Hadn't heard it. This was a phone she'd held in her hand all day, every day, since we boarded. A phone she wouldn't set down on a table. And for 40 minutes, she somehow hadn't heard it ring. I sat with that for a while. Then I made myself stop. I was tired. I was reaching. I was about to turn into a jealous man inventing a crime out of a slow elevator and a bad signal. I didn't want to be that person. So I pushed it down, and I smiled at her, and we went to dinner. The next evening, I had a work matter I couldn't put off, something that needed an hour of my attention, and Paige said she'd take a walk on her own. I told her to go ahead. The decks at night up there are cold. The wind comes straight off the water and it cuts, even in summer, even with the light still in the sky at that latitude. When she came back to the cabin, she had a jacket over her shoulders. A man's jacket. Dark, heavier than anything she owned, and it was not mine. I knew every piece of clothing I'd packed, and that jacket had never been in our bag. I asked her about it. Just that, easy, not loud. Where the jacket came from. And for a second, a real second, she didn't have an answer. I watched it happen on her face. Then it came. She said she'd run into an old acquaintance up on deck, someone she hadn't seen in years, a man traveling with his family. They'd had a cocktail together. He'd noticed she was cold and put his jacket around her, and she'd simply forgotten to give it back. It was a smooth story. It even made sense, the way a thing makes sense when someone has had a minute to build it. I had no proof of anything, not one piece. But my gut has rarely been wrong with me, and my gut was standing straight up. From that night on, I watched. Every time she moved, I knew where she went. The night after that, I waited until the cabin was dark and made my breathing slow and even, like a man asleep. It didn't take long. Paige slipped out of bed, eased the door open, and was gone. I was up the second it clicked shut. I followed her out into the corridor and onto the decks, keeping back, letting other people fill the space between us. A ship at night makes that easy. Music somewhere, groups of strangers, light and noise to disappear into. I lost her once, for a moment, near a stairwell. Then I found her again, and then I saw them. They were at a small table, tucked into a far corner along the rail where the crowd thinned out, talking, smiling at each other the way you smile when there's no audience to perform for. He reached over and fixed a piece of her hair. He put an arm around her waist. And then, quick and easy, they kissed. Something in my chest closed. I wanted to cross that deck right then and stand over their table and make them look at me. But I didn't. A scene in front of 100 strangers would only hand her the story she wanted. The jealous husband, the lunatic, and ship security would have me by the arms inside a minute. Whatever I did, I'd do it with no one watching. I walked back fast to the cabin and I sat down to wait for her. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. I wanted to understand who this man was to her. Maybe the old acquaintance who'd lent her the jacket. Maybe someone she'd met on the ship. But the real truth I couldn't even have guessed. While I waited, I packed. I took her things out of the closet and the drawers and folded them into her suitcase, every piece, and I set it in the middle of the cabin floor. Then I stood next to it. I didn't rehearse anything. I just stood there with the suitcase and waited for the door. When Paige came in, she expected one of two husbands. The one asleep, or the one half watching something on the screen. What she got was her own packed suitcase under the lights and me beside it. I said, "Who is the man you were just holding on that deck?" I watched the whole thing, so don't try to lie to me. She went straight to denial, fast, almost before I'd finished. She said, "You've got this completely wrong. We were only talking. Stop making a scene." She kept going, twisting it, telling me I hadn't seen what I'd seen, telling me I was the problem in the room. I didn't argue. There was nothing in it for me. You can't talk a person out of a thing they've decided to keep lying about, and I wasn't going to spend the night trying. So I took the handle of her suitcase, wheeled it out into the narrow corridor of the ship, and I put her out there after it. Then I closed the door. The hallway was quiet on the other side of it. I stood on my side, and I didn't open it again. The next morning, I went up late for breakfast. They were already there, the two of them, at a table together in the open dining room. No corner this time. No hiding anything. They didn't need it anymore, and they weren't pretending otherwise. I didn't look at them long. I drank my coffee, I ate, and I felt no need to walk over. After breakfast, I went down to the front desk. I had them cut Paige off from anything we shared, and I told them any new charges of hers from that point on were to land on her own account alone. From that morning, she couldn't spend $1 of mine on a holiday with another man. And I had it put on record that we were no longer traveling as a couple, no longer sharing the cabin. That left me 4 days on the ship by myself, and I'll tell you something honest about those 4 days. They were not a celebration. I ate alone and kept noticing, in a strange, quiet way, that I no longer had to perform anything across the table. I read on the balcony, because the cabin felt heavy with her gone from it, and the air outside was easier to be in. At night, I'd go up to the rail and listen to the water move against the hull. It was the first real quiet I'd had in years. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was mine, and no one was lying to me inside it. I flew home alone, back to the house outside Portland, and the first thing I did was pick up the tablet we shared. We had one account between us, one login, everything syncing to it without either of us thinking twice. Photos, notes, messages, all of it pooling into the same place. Paige never thought about that. I'm not sure she remembered the tablet existed. It was all there, months of it. Every message between her and that man, opening up in front of me in order, oldest to newest, like a book I'd never been allowed to read. Whatever last small hope I'd been protecting, that this was a stupid shipboard thing, a weak moment, it did not survive that screen. I found his ticket for the cruise. I found the two of them choosing dates. I found them talking, weeks ahead of the sailing, about where on the ship they could meet without being seen. And then I found the part that took the air out of me. She hadn't only told him which ship to book. She'd told him to book the same class of cabin we had, so he'd be put on the same set of decks, close to us, close to her, the whole 7 nights. That was when I stopped thinking of it as an affair she'd fallen into. She didn't fall into anything. She built the trip. The vacation I spent 3 months planning for the 2 of us. She had been quietly planning too, and she planned it for the 3 of us. The next day I took that tablet, drove to a lawyer, and filed for divorce. I didn't agonize over it. There was nothing left in the marriage to weigh. Whatever way back there might have been, it had closed out on that water, and I knew it. About 2 weeks later, Paige sent me a long message. Pages of it. She was sorry. She'd never been so sorry. She'd made the biggest mistake of her life, and she needed to see me, to sit down with me and explain, to make me understand. I read it once and didn't answer. When the silence got through to her, she changed her approach. She started coming at me sideways. Through old friends of ours, asking them to talk to me. Then through my own parents, asking them to work on me, to soften me. The message she wanted carried was always the same. She'd go to counseling. She'd walk away from every piece of property without a fight. She'd give up anything at all if I would just give her one more chance. My family didn't bend. Not my friends, not my parents. They heard her out, and they stood where I stood, and they told her so plainly. And some weeks after we got home, I learned one more thing. The man she'd planned the whole trip around, the one she'd risked 16 years to be near, had ended it with her not long after the ship docked. I saw the divorce through to the end. Every attempt she made to pull me back into a conversation, I left unanswered. Not out of cruelty. There was just nothing left in me that wanted to pick the phone back up. I've thought about whether I could have done it differently. If this had been one bad night, one drink too many, one moment she'd lost her footing and regretted by morning, maybe I'd have sat with it longer. Maybe I'd have let her explain. People stumble, and a marriage can sometimes carry a stumble. But that is not what this was. You don't stumble into a calendar. You don't stumble into telling another man which cabin to book so he'll sleep 2 corridors from your husband. She didn't fall into this. It was a vacation she planned, and she planned it for herself and for him, and I was only the man who paid for it. When the divorce closed, the house stayed mine, and so did the rest of what we'd built. I won't pretend that part didn't matter. After 16 years, a man should not walk out with empty hands. But it had already ended long before any of that. It ended on the ship, in that narrow hallway, the night I rolled her suitcase out the door and closed it. Everything after was just paperwork catching up to something I already knew. For the husband, this cruise was a way to bring back the old spark and spend romantic time together. But his wife wanted to spend this luxury vacation with another man, rather than her husband. She was